Have you ever noticed, I think it's a thing, in America today, we have kind of a love-hate relationship with our stuff. We not? We have kind of this love-hate relationship with our stuff. Some people, they can't get enough. They want more. I need more. You got one of this, I need another one. I got one in red, I need it in blue and green and yellow. More, 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 more. Other people are like, oh my goodness, there's too much stuff. Can anyone relate to either one of those extremes? Maybe you see that really great sale around one of the holidays and more, but then you're getting ready to move or you're trying to clean up the basement or something and you're like, holy cow, where did all this stuff come from? Probably we can all relate to both of those extremes a little bit at one point or another. But it's not just about having more or do we have too much. America, I think, has a love-hate relationship and questions with their stuff around the idea of which is better, old or new. Old or new. Now, there's some people, they love to have whatever is new, and the newest, the brightest, the shiniest, whatever it is. It's part of what drives people to shop, okay? How many people like to shop, and you just, boy, it's just like your eyes light up. Ooh, new, 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 new. But then there's some people, you know, they just kind of have that old spirit a little bit, or just, you know, there's something like, boy, I like the old, I like what I know, the familiar, the comfortable. And here's the dilemma. Some people, again, they're split. They like the new, but don't want to necessarily get rid of the old either. Don't want to get rid of that. Can anyone relate to this? School's about to start. We need a new pair of shoes because school's going to start. Oh my goodness, we can't start school without a new pair of shoes, but what, you going to get rid of the old? No, I'm not going to get rid of the old pair. They're so comfortable. Mom, I need new jeans. Oh, throw those old ratty ones. Oh, they're the most comfortable thing. Can any of you relate here? You're constantly maybe updating things and getting something new, but there's something, some old piece you just can't get rid of. How many have a favorite old pair of sneakers or boots or a pair of jeans? Man, I just can't wait for Saturday when I can put on the old comfy jeans, the ones that just fit. Your wife or your husband or mom or dad or somebody would be mortified to see you out in it. But doggone it, I am not getting rid of it. Some of us, that old thing that we hang on to, maybe it is that hideous piece of furniture in the den. That chair that looks like it should have gone out with Fred Flintstone, but it's shaped to my body, and I just can't get rid of it. We all probably wrestle with this a little bit here. This wanting the new, but still kind of hanging on to the old. There's a lot of reasons why we hang on to those old things. Sometimes we hold on to some of those old things because, doggone, we're just too lazy to go toss it out. That would take a lot of effort. Sometimes it's the most comfortable thing. Yes, I know it doesn't look good to go out, but it's so comfortable. Some of it's a preference thing. My mom has a pretty nice sewing machine. She likes to do some sewing. She's got a nice sewing machine, but she's still got the old one because there's some crazy stitch or something that one does that's just better on that one than the new one, even though it's new. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes it's convenience, but there are all kinds of reasons why we hold on to things. The bottom line is that a lot of us have a lot of stuff lying around, even as we are living into the future. I was reminded of this the other day. You know, a lot of you know that Manheim Central just finished up their band camp, 2 weeks of band camp. Now, during band camp, oftentimes they have a special theme for the day. You dress up in a certain way, and pictures and things. The other day was 80s Day. And so Jonathan is consulting mom and dad, because that was our time. You know, okay, how do I dress for 80s? And Bonnie showed some pictures, and we did a little bit of research there, and he learned how to peg his pants there, and he was very proud that he could peg his pants. He said better than mom could, and had a shirt on there and a denim, and we found a pair of sunglasses that was reminiscent, and a hat. He was ready, he had the look. But the piece de resistance, the thing that just topped it off and screamed 80s, if you know. Jonathan went to school for band, with his authentic, original cassette Sony Walkman. Why do we have a cassette Walkman? I don't know. I'm not sure that it actually works, but he was styling there. He fit. He had the Walkman. Why? Because for some reason we couldn't let go of this old piece. We still had it. We still had it. Why? I don't know. In many areas of our lives, holding on to the old, even as we are holding on to new things and getting even more new things in many areas of our lives, it really doesn't matter. If you've got the space, or you can deal with it piling up around you, okay, good for you. But what about when it comes to faith? What about when it comes to faith? There I want to suggest that if we're talking about old and new, old life, new life, it's a very different matter. Holding on to holding on to the old, even as we are living into the new, and holding on to the new, holding on to the old and holding on to the new, it just really doesn't go together. Truthfully, there are a couple passages you could look up, like Colossians 3, 9 to 10, Ephesians 4:24, that talk about old and new. They talk about old and new, and the way they're talking about old and new, and they approach faith in terms of old and new, is that there's an old nature and a new nature. Though if you take the time to look those up, and where it's talking about old nature and new nature, you see it's some really pretty serious stuff. It's not old and new like an old pair of shoes and a new pair of shoes. There's some comparisons where it's clear that we're supposed to be living in a new nature, not an old nature. But the text that we have today in Ephesians, as we're working our way through the book here, the text that we have today gives us a little bit more of a serious look at this idea of old and new in relationship to faith. If the subject is faith, if we're not talking about shoes or video games or iPhones, if we're talking about faith and we're talking old and new, there's some pretty serious terms that are used here. More than just old and new. Take a listen here to Ephesians chapter 2. I'm going to begin at verse 1. I'm reading verse 1 through the first part of verse 5. Ephesians 2, 1 through the first part of verse 5. As for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins, in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world, and of the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. All of us also lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our sinful nature, and following its desires and thoughts. Like the rest, we were by nature objects of wrath. But because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in transgression. You listen to this passage that Paul shared with the Ephesians, and if we inject faith, the idea of faith or belief, into the continuum of old and new, if we make that the matter in which we're talking old and new, we have to see faith as a divider. We have to see there that we need to understand there is a before faith way that we lived. There is a before faith, the way that we experience life, and there is the way that we live now with faith, or after we find faith. Now in Ephesians, let's be clear, it doesn't explicitly say faith. If we're talking old and new, it's talking dead and alive. It doesn't explicitly say faith. Okay, rather it says what moves us from the old way to the new way, from being dead in transgression of sins in verse number 1 to alive in Christ in verse 5. The thing that moves us, it says, is God. And we know that God moves us from dead in transgression to alive in Christ. We know that He moves us. He does that when we say yes to Him. He moves us from dead in Christ, from dead in transgression to alive in Christ when we say yes to Christ. He moves us from dead to alive because we declare our faith. So faith is a divider here in the way that we live between old and new, between dead and alive. It's pretty hard to see then how you could possibly, there's any way that simultaneously you could possibly live in the past and hold on to some of those things that you did, ways that you lived, and at the same time be reaching for and living new in Christ. How is it that we could possibly hold our new identity in Christ with the way that we lived and acted before? No, we need to understand that everything has to be remade. Everything is made new because of that divider, because of faith, because of God. If God takes us from dead to alive, everything has to be remade. Everything is new. You can't have it both ways. It's all in for Christ or it's not. You're either all for Christ or you're not. We have some scriptures that tell us this in pretty stark terms I'd like to share with you. See if you recognize this here from Matthew chapter 16. Matthew chapter 16, verse 24. This is Jesus that is sharing this. Matthew 16, verse 24. Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." If you jump to Mark chapter 8, verse 34, we read here, this is Jesus, called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, "If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." If we move to Luke chapter 9, verse 23, then he said to them all, Jesus said, "If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me." Does it sound familiar? Yeah, it's the exact same verse in three Gospels. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record Jesus saying the same thing because it's so important. It's all in for Christ. If you're going to follow him, there's no part way. There's no in between. There's no yes and. There's no future and past. It's all in. Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10, verse 38. Jesus says, "Anyone who does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me." We need to understand that the difference between dead in transgression and alive in Christ is an absolute one. It is stark. It's this or it's that. It's old or it's new. We don't hold these things together like I've got all my new sneakers, but I've got my old ones in the closet just in case for later on. There's a choice that has to be made. The other day I was doing something and I was listening to some music from Les Mis. Any of you know the musical Les Mis story, Les Miserables? I'm reading through that now. Things about that big. I'm not all the way through it yet. Benjamin has a bet with me whether or not I'll finish it before he finishes college. Stay tuned. Stay tuned with that. But if you don't know, the story Les Mis here is centered around character Jean Valjean. In his younger years, he had a pretty rough, hard life. It ended him up in some trouble. He ended up in prison. And he ended up, instead of 5 years because he wasn't a good team player, he ended up 19 years in prison until he's finally released. He's released from prison, and then what's he do about the first thing he does once he gets out is he skips parole. He's just not learning lessons. He skips parole. And so for the rest of his years and for the rest of the musical, he is pursued by this policeman named Javert. Now there comes a moment, a very faithful moment in the musical, a very faithful moment in the story where Jean Valjean has Javert in his hands, his life in his hands. Jean Valjean can kill him, and he's been asked to kill him. But Jean Valjean spares Javert's life. And this creates such a moral crisis for Javert. Javert is this buttoned-down, by-the-book policeman. He is all about the law. That defines him. It is who he is. He represents the law. He carries out the law. But here he is he's confronted with this man who is a criminal who's let him free. How can he continue to pursue Valjean? How can he who's experienced mercy at this criminal's hands possibly end up one day putting him in jail if he ever got him and the roles were reversed? How could he do it? But on the other hand, how can he not do it? Because he is all about the law. He's dedicated to the law. And so he proclaims, he can't live in the debt of a thief. How is it? He just cannot envision. He doesn't think a world can exist that has these two different type of people in it. One who symbolizes the law and one who symbolizes mercy. They cannot live in the same world as what he determines. And so he makes a fateful decision, ultimately taking his own life. What I want you to think and get from there is this. Each and every one of us must see that we have the most fateful decision to make about which kind of world will we live in. Either the world that we see, the world that we think we know, the world that is presented to us every 24 hours cycle in the news and by Hollywood and media and friends and neighbors and business and all the people that push you in a million different ways to do what they want you to do or to be what they think you should be. Do we want to make the choice for that kind of world and live in that kind of world? Or do we want to live in the world the way that God would have it to be? That's the choice that each and every one of us has to make. And it is the most faithful choice that we have to make. Are we going to live man's way, or are we going to live God's way? You cannot do both. You cannot have man's way and God's way. You can't have the old and the new. You just can't. Which life will we choose? Which life will we hold on to? If we make that decision for God, for Christ, we must see ourselves as living a completely new life. And that in essence, we're not dead in transgression, but dead to that old life. Alive in this new life with Christ, dead to that old life without Him. We reject the way that we behave. We reject the way that we lived before. We reject the way that we thought before. We reject that old way. We embrace completely, totally God's way. Understand that old way, that way that's dead in transgression it leads to death. Now, spiritually, finally, it will be for eternity. There will be a physical death that's it. And there's no coming back. But this new life, the new life that we have in Christ, the new life that God will give us because of Christ, it leads to life, a changed life now, and a life that will go on for eternity. A life with no end of joy and peace and blessing. 2 Corinthians 5:17 puts it this way. Those who become Christians become new persons. They are not the same anymore. For the old life is gone, a new life has begun. Here today, my question for you, are you living the old, or are you living the new? It's not a question, are you living both? Are you living the old, or are you living the new? Are you really dead, or are you really